So let's do some firearm sketching real quick. So if you didn't watch the firearm knowledge video, I'm going to be using this as my reference for what we're about to do here. But basically, you need to think about what goes into real world firearms first. And we're going to do a pistol in this case. And so when you look at these, they have basically the same forms. And that's the main thing. So secondary, tertiary details, the materials, the colors, and the a breakup of the silhouette that really makes them look unique from one another. But that's going to be our guiding principle here. Use references, right? So next up, I'm gonna go into Krita. You can use Photoshop or whatever, but I'm gonna do a. Let me save this actually as a 4K here real quick. And, all right, so RGB 8-bit background color is gonna be a 60% gray, I think. Yeah, 60%. Okay, 2 layers, so we get a layer to work on. Load that thing up. All right, I'm gonna use this brush here. That is, oh, my tablet is messing up again. Tends to do that a lot, where it just switches to whatever it wants, and you use screen ratio as well, uh, particularly if you're doing circles, right? So let's see if we can actually draw over here now. Let's see if it works. Okay, it is drawn. All right, cool. Now, a little bit of a rough start, but this is pressure sensitive, size, opacity, flow. That's all this brush is. It's a medium round brush, nothing special here. You could doodle and sketch out firearms all day long. So when you look at a pistol and you break it down to its most fundamental shapes, use a line tool for this. You have your slide, you have your top part of your frame, perhaps. It looks something like this. Okay. It's, you have a grip. That's part of the frame, usually, right? So that's a template, more or less. If you want to start sketching on top of this on a new layer, you could do that. You can make this smaller. And there you go. So you can start changing things around a little bit if you want. You want to put a slope back here. You want to make this round out this way like that. That's fun. If you want to go ahead and just bring it down, you can do that. Bring that down. Maybe you want to have like a bevel here at the bottom. You see what's going on? So we're playing with the edges more or less. And that a lot of hard surface mechanical shapes, you're playing with the edges for the most part. I'm gonna keep that straight for now. Maybe just yeah, we can go with that. Why not? That was an accident, but we can play around with these ideas all day long and try to adjust the corners, the edges, make things happen basically, right? It's a lot easier to sketch firearms than you probably thought. Now, so if you're trying to come up with your own designs, obviously doing it this way is going to be a lot more beneficial than say um, trying to just go straight into like 3D modeling or whatever the case. You can do basically the same thing in 3D modeling, but it's a little bit more challenging because you're going to have to start working with possibly chamfers and bevels, and you're going to be doing the width at the same time, not just coming up with the overall layout of the firearm. So a lot of product designers, believe it or not, I know you see a lot of fancy kind of drawings online and whatnot that look really good, but the side orthographic drawing is still probably one of the most useful things here. Okay. So using inspiration from some real firearms, you need to think about little nuanced details sometimes. Like if this was a military pistol, can a um, operator put their finger in this area with a big glove on in Arctic conditions, perhaps? Can they do that? No. Um, maybe you need to be a little bit bigger then. So you'll see a lot of um, firearms specifically made for the military do, in fact, think about little things like that. And they tend to be a little bit bigger and bulkier and heavier looking than maybe like sports firearms or something like that, recreational firearms. You have like a thumb rest in this area, so you might have a little bit of shape changes taking place throughout this. And this is where the 3D blockouts can help out a lot as well, because we can't. It's kind of hard to imagine the depth changes with a line drawing sometimes, right? Especially when it's an orthographic side drawing. Think about where we're placing certain things. We need room for possibly 3 fingers down here with gloves on as well, right? So if we ever have to make something bigger, we can use lasso tools. We can pull things around too. We can be very rough with this. We don't have to worry about it being a super refined thing just yet. Right, and just like the vehicle design video, I'm gonna do a new layer. The vehicle or sketching video, I was talking about how you can do these kinda lines to create the idea of vehicles perhaps, right? So you can come up with, like, little quick ideas of a vehicle anyways, and then throw in tires or whatever, stuff like that. You can do that with firearms too. So you can stay very loose with them if you wanted to, but, like, sometimes it could be fun to do stuff like that through these areas. Just try to get different looks going overall. Sometimes you can do, like, converging lines perhaps. It's a little rough, but I think you get the idea. If you have a program like, Lazy Nizumi, you should be able to turn it on here real quick and, use some brush smoothing. And so, we can switch that to, massive smoothing as well if we needed to, alright? And you attach this to the window, there's a shortcut that I just used to do that, but, Control F3 usually attaches it to the window. So this works not only in Krita, it works in Blender and things as well. So you don't have to rely on the software itself necessarily. You can rely on, uh, Lazy Nizumi to do the brush smoothing for the most part. And it's actually quite useful because some tools don't have any smoothing on them, like the lasso tool. But if you have that third-party app, now you have a little bit of brush smoothing for the lasso too, which is quite good. Okay, and so keep that in mind. Also works with sculpting in Blender or grease pencil or whatever. It's a little weird in Blender though. It's a little finicky sometimes. All right, so we're gonna need a back strap of some sort. And we can play with the shapes here and do all kinds of different little adjustments and just come up with interesting stuff for the most part. So you can see we can do maybe something like that. Oh, let's try to get that. I kind of want to do like something like this though. Kind of have like a little inset here. Yeah, so sketching goes a very far way. There's also tonal value painting as well. That's something you could think about. Tonal value painting goes a long way. And the reason is because we have a lack of depth information, right? We don't know, if there's slight little surface changes taking place, we might be able to get away with doing like really light lines to represent that. But it can easily become confusing as you're trying to work on these things later on, perhaps, on what kind of things are coming forward or going backwards. But tonal values will pull things forward and backwards. So this one here should run into that, something like that, anyways. At least on the backside, it will do that number. So come out this way. You add all the features and components you want to these things. So if this has a magazine, obviously, I'm going to turn brush smoothing down now and on two layers, which sometimes is good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it hurts. But a lot of times having two layers can be useful. If you're doing this like on paper, you could of course use like blue and red ink perhaps. Start with the red and then switch over to blue later. And so you do your primary stuff with blue or red, and then you do your details with blue, stuff like that. So a mag release button. I don't know if I like it being just a little dot, but I do like the idea of a dot for some reason. So maybe we'll change it a little bit and do something like that. And see how we're having the one shape eat into the other shape a little bit. Okay, so we can start doing things like this basically. Start having a little bit of fun with it. Think about the trigger and how we want it to look. Look at it real world inspiration for triggers and kind of pick and choose the things you like and don't like and kind of modify this one and come up with something new. I'm going to collapse the layers just because I want to be able to erase them. A lot of times I like working destructively on one layer, but you can definitely duplicate it if you want to make a variation and then just keep working on that variation. All right. If it needs some kind of rail system. Now, of course, these things have actual sizes, and so you can pull references off of Google to get these things correct. They're gonna be something like this anyways, generally speaking. All right. And so they go in two directions though. Like these ones will move backwards about 45 degrees, and then on the bottom it's solid, but it'll move back 45 degrees as well. So this is like a ridge, if you would. Right. All right. So can you see the barrel on this one? Probably not too well. It might be a little bit obscured. So there we go. We'll do that. Maybe it's a thicker barrel, perhaps. Who knows? So you can think about the internal components as well. You don't necessarily have to sketch these things right away, but a barrel, for example, would go in through here, and somewhere in this area would be the chamber, right? Somewhere in that area. And so right around there, maybe we would have a ejection port on the other side, perhaps. So if you want to sketch those out like that, you could do it on a new layer. That way you can turn it on and off if you needed to. I'm just going to mark where the ejection port might be for now. A lot of other little things we can consider adding if we want like a little drop down here, perhaps, so that maybe our front sights can be changed later on with like a little modular type of sights. Like basically, you can just swap the sight in and out. They need to align with each other usually. So if you're going for like really low slung sights, you could do things like this, no problems. A lot of times sights need to raise up quite a bit, especially if you're going to have a sound suppressor on it. So you might consider adding extensions or just redesign them in general. So maybe do a little curve to it or something. There's all kinds of things you can do when it comes to layouts like that, right? And so overall, we're getting there. I wouldn't say we're done or even near done, but we're getting there. That's nice. You can spend a little bit of time on these things. Maybe there's like a little bevel that takes place in this area a little bit. Who knows? Comes down this way. So you can add little indicators for that. I don't really care for that front sight. So we're going to modify it a bit. They need to be in line with each other too. So that way you can aim the firearm. So you might use a line tool, hold shift here in Krita. We can find, I always have the eraser on. We can align them up though. You see, we might take this one just a little bit higher because usually they have little dots in the back to aim it, right? Or some kind of little pattern or shape. So maybe something like that. By dots, I mean just like a graphic, not a, it's not always modeled necessarily. All right, so we're getting there. So let's figure out what we're doing with this slide. Kind of started on it, stopped, but I'll make sure we're using massive smoothing for a second. So I kind of like the idea of taking this line all the way through like that. You see what I'm saying? So these are little designer tricks that could possibly happen along the way. So we get something like that going perhaps. But then right here we do like a big bevel. So you can draw circles for bevels sometimes and then work those two shapes together, but eventually this would not exist, right? This is why working with little layers sometimes can be quite useful. And then maybe this doesn't exist. Just a guide so we can erase it. Press E to get to the eraser, right? All right, so overall, starting to look more appropriate, perhaps. The thumb rest here may not actually, it may not actually be solid all the way through. Like, might just knock it back a little bit. And you want to clean things up as needed as well. You know, sometimes they get to be a little too distracting. Having things on multiple layers, of course, always makes that interesting. And just kind of meander through the whole process here. Just have fun with it. See what you can get going. If you want to name your layers, it also helps with organization of everything. But last but not least, I'm not going to attach those like that. If I can find the right layer, that'd be nice. So we'll just leave those a little bit more like that for now. Maybe we could draw them back up a slight bit or something. It's going to be on you what you really choose to do with these things, right? I'm going to collapse all the layers though, because I'm pretty happy with what I got going on. So I don't have to fight with the cleanup as much. This is a loose sketch, by the way. You can go back and you can ink this on a new layer using a hard round brush that's pressure sensitive size, so you have better opacity. You can go under that layer, that inking layer, line layer. You can do shading behind it, or you can even cell shade it. So cell shading is something you want to look into if you're going to do quick illustrations. Krita is really good for it, by the way, because you can break. You can basically do like a color fill, like a color map or color ID map almost for the whole thing, and you can break a layer apart based on color. So it's kind of interesting. You just go through, color some things, different colors, and then have the layer split apart automatically, and you'll have basically more or less masks everywhere for the whole thing. I don't know if I'm gonna bring that back down though like that. Just having it run through to the back is okay. Um, does that work? It looks okay. I don't think it looks great. Could we have come up with a better profile there or a different kind of line setup? Maybe could have done like a one all the way through like that. So you can vary these things quite a bit. And it helps out with the overall shape and form. So this is going to be something like a bevel in this area, or maybe a chamfer all the way through. So you don't have to necessarily mark it the way I just did, but a light mark could help just to kind of sell the illusion that that's occurring, or at least remind you that it's occurring. So when you go to try to model something like this, that would be something you're looking for. So we got kind of like opposing. Those are almost okay. Yeah. So somewhere in the middle here, can align to the front. We can align to the rear, or we could try to do kind of like counter things in here as well. Counter lines, edges. That's a possibility. So this kind of points to the chamber or the ejection port. Could be useful. Might look all right. So if we do a big rounded section here, obviously, you can see where that's going. So we still have that line kind of leading that way, and then it decides to rotate. So little things to think about the whole way through, undoubtedly. You'll have a lot of fun with this as you do it more and more. It's just drawing, right? Really all it is. Sometimes you want to do cutouts to try to sell the idea of depth. So if you cut out something like so, you can think about the spacing between everything here, how much spacing it might need to look right. Maybe bevel that one a little. Maybe the front ones just bevel a little as well. A little bit more than that. Okay. But we would be able to see now inside of it. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on here because the barrel would be shaded usually, but you would have barrel slightly exposed at the front of it now. That's something you could think about. In that case, we wouldn't have the ability to add texture here. So if you're trying to unload it, it wouldn't work out too well. But it's something you could do, right? This one could have texture back here, but maybe you make it a little bit different. It doesn't always have to align with real firearms necessarily in the sense that like, I want to do a line through here real quick. So this will be pushed out a little bit more here, perhaps. Doesn't always have to make sense as far as like the way real firearms work when you're doing sci-fi designs. So if you want to just put the texture here, it still sells the illusion of that texture going through this area so that you can rack the slide a lot easier. But that's obviously in real life, that would be way less functional than having just texture in this area vertically, right? But it still sells that illusion, so it's fun. And yeah, so does this kind of shape setup, does it make as much sense as this shape setup? Like, do they work together? Not really. So they're kind of opposing each other right now. And everything when it comes to design is about balance, right? So I don't know if I'd run with that on the front there exactly like that, but it's just it does look kind of interesting, but it might be better if we match this to the back or we match the rest of the firearm to this kind of idea here. So I'm just going to erase that real quick. And what else is on this layer? All that. Okay, so we'll do another layer so we don't have to mess everything up too bad. But we can try to figure out like what we might want to do in that area anyways. So like sometimes, you might try swinging something from way back here back up that way. That's a possibility, doing like a little cross section almost. That one looks that good, but you definitely can try these ideas out, right? You're looking for different little things like this possibly in a design. It's just a lot of fun. You can do kind of like complementary shapes, if you would, or complementary edges, if it Tends to work out better that way. Okay, so let's try going from here to there, maybe? A little bit faster, like that. Okay, we could probably do that. Let's do it right through there, like that. Bring that one back, and then we'll do, okay, you see where this is going? Bevel that one. We can erase all that in there. We don't need it. We'll need that. So maybe we got something going now, a little bit more interesting per se. Turn my brush smoothing back off. Massive's great for long, smooth lines, but it's not very good for sketching in general. So, well, I mean, it can be. Sometimes it is. All right, so that's kind of interesting, I think. It's getting a little too, there's a little problem here kind of occurring with the design, which is there's too many horizontal lines kind of running next to each other. So I might consider dropping that there. I'm going to collapse it all down, start erasing that. Maybe just do something like that instead. So that way we don't have as many horizontal lines happening and simplify it. A lot of times you need to go back and look at it objectively and just kind of simplify your design as much as you possibly can because there's no reason to overdo it, you know. You can break the plane as well. So a lot of times when you have a surface level of an object, you can always try breaking that plane, that flat surface. Just try, say here on the top, we can break that plane and pull this out a little bit up here and make that come up above the midsection of the slide, right? And we could do that same thing here at the front if we wanted as well. I think if we did that here at the front, though, we'll have a little bit of a problem with the sight. So we'll move it forward a little bit more. Just use the lasso tool for it and bring that plane level up right here. Try to get that back aligned with each other. Keep messing it up. Yeah, so maybe something like that then. And if we need to reposition it even, because I pushed it back a little further than I thought I was going to, we can do that. All right. So you can see we're off to a good start on this one. Really thinking about it, really working things out. And you would have a really hard time doing this. I'm gonna break the plane here. You'd have a really hard time doing this, I think, while modeling, if you're not real comfortable with your modeling tools. Okay. So that's why I always recommend starting with sketches first. Designing in general is pretty rough if you've never done it. Just thinking about kind of shape changes and how to align things and what to erase and what not to erase and what to keep, you know, not keep. But trying to do this all in 3D at the same time is going to be a real problematic experience at first. So we can make any number of choices here as well. Like maybe we hollow it out in the back. So we just got these little squares. A little hard to do that in that area with this brush at this size, but we made it happen. Could add a slight little bevel here in this area. You can use line weight to emphasize what's in front of one another as well. So if you use a heavier line weight here, we can say that that's going to be pushed back underneath it. So it's like a drop shadow, more or less, is what's going on there. And so even for this one, you can see like I pushed that in, and so that all drops down there. That doesn't really make as much sense as I would like it to make sense. So I might need to drop down the section below it instead of that one. And so we'll do that instead. Okay. So we'll keep that one running straight. And if you see that one's already pulled through, doesn't mean it can't drop inwards, right? But I don't know if I necessarily like it being pulled out like that either. So you can drop it in a little bit instead, right? Chisel it out. And so on the back side, we can also do the same thing now. We break the plane back here if we needed to. Right, a bunch of little things you can think about through the whole process and think about how this thing actually gets mounted in this area. Does it just snap in with some plastic parts and pieces, or I don't know, does it have like little tiny uh, brackets that mount in this area, perhaps, right? Like maybe you can make a little bracket system, or maybe like little latches, perhaps even just to kind of make the sci-fi design stand out more, perhaps. If you want to do something like that, you could. Sci-fi aspect, should I say? So little odd and ends. I don't think that looks very good, so I won't do that. Matter of fact, that whole shape there, I kind of want to change it a bit, but already went this far. I might want to keep it, but I think I'll just straighten it out personally. It's a refine things as you go along. This is going to happen not only in 2D. If you were to go to 3D with this later on, and you were to try modeling it, you're going to refine things as you do it in 3D as well. Because what looks good here as a sketch may not look good on an actual physical or 3D form, anyways. So you think about those things a little bit, right? I think that looks a little bit nicer, perhaps a little bit thin down here, right? And so all in all, could you hang that over a little bit even? Yeah, you could. I'm not sure. Not sure if I would do that normally, but it's up to you. It's your discretion to make things look or be however you want them to be, right? But do slow down a little bit, put some thought into it. All right, so yeah, we got something kind of started here. I think this one I might just wrap around, send through like that. All right, so the very front of it, get rounded out a little bit more. You see what I'm saying? And maybe it's the wrong size too. Like maybe it's just too small. So do fluctuate your sizes of things. In this case, Krita has a little bad problem. Like if I stop here and I move again, sometimes it'll tear the image apart. If you ever run into that situation, what you do is you press you lasso it, you hit Control C, and then you just hit Delete, and you hit Control V, and now you got a new layer. Okay, so it's a very fast way of working with that. And so now we can potentially move it around and not worry about ripping everything apart. You see, we could probably line up that bottom section here with that line there even, or we could push it down a little bit and just have a little kind of an indication that there might be another edge going through here and try to line everything up just the best that we can. Okay, so something like that might look a little bit nicer perhaps. Um, I would say the overall form there though, I'm not a big fan of it necessarily. I don't mind that the idea it goes to a little point, but just the curve of it is bothering me a little bit. So you can see we could do things like that. Instead of just having little lines to indicate like a cutout, maybe we actually give them some thickness too, right? Maybe we break these lines from the edge as well. So you would want to spend some more time kind of rendering your ideas out and just making sure they're going the way you want them to go, basically, more or less. Like this doesn't even necessarily have to run all the way through in this area like that, right? Like you could just bring it from up here, break the plane, and then run it down, and then like dissipate it here at the bottom so that it uh, looks a little bit more something like that. Perhaps you can see I keep pushing that edge back too, so I might have to actually pull it back forward if I go too far with that. But I think you get the idea. You can do that and kind of give the indication that it becomes leveled with the other piece there at some point. Maybe it's like bevels in here a little bit, right? Does something like that. All right, cool. So add any other detail you want as you see fit. You want to do like a little cutout here. Maybe it cuts out fully, maybe it doesn't. Maybe just like a little dropped in area, perhaps. You could do things like that. You see this brush is pressure sensitive opacity. So what ends up happening with that is that you can do shape breakups at any point too, by the way. Um, pressure sensitive opacity. So I was actually able to add a little shading there, perhaps. Something you could consider doing while you're sketching, just to kind of sell your ideas to yourself, I guess, a little bit better. Maybe we bevel the front of that too. I kind of like it being a little bit sharper though, so I'm not going to. Could flatten this out here. So anything that's round can become flat. See how that looks a little bit more flat? I don't know. Round kind of looks better. So anything that's flat can become round. Anything that's round can become flat. So think of doing something like flat shape, right? And imagine doing a curve through just like, let's say, this one and this one, right? And then maybe you only bevel like this here instead, right? So you can see where that works out. That's a good little technique to kind of come up with what looks like a complicated shape, but it's really not. It's so anything that's round or just asymmetrical or curvy, should I say? Right? You look at the well, let's try to keep it a little simpler. Okay, something like that, for example. Just imagine a point somewhere and a point somewhere. You can start cutting things up, basically, right? So you can turn them into flat shapes at some point if needed. That's all you're doing to go back and forth between those. It's nothing really that crazy. Also, I think this is too long, so I'm going to push it back down. And we do have, when we start doing that, we lose a lot of we don't really lose nothing per se, but we have a lot of empty space now that we can utilize. So if we wanted to add a little texture up here at the front that mimics that back there, we could possibly just add a little bit of texture in here now, right? Could do it like that, or we could go maybe kind of reverse of that. You see, like there's all kinds of ideas here we can roll with if we wanted to. Just start filling out that area. So I'm thinking like maybe something like that, kind of like that back one there. And so we can cut it here at the bottom, bevel it. And now you can start seeing where that one was going, right? And we don't have to put it in anything though. It doesn't have to be surrounded by a shape. Like we just leave them there as texture. So like that shape is imaginary almost, right? Like it's not actually rendered. There's no depth there. But the pattern builds the illusion that that shape exists in that area. So there you go. That's another cool little trick, I guess, if you want to do that. We'll just give these some depth so they occupy a little more space. We'll keep them flat, going left to right, instead of getting a little tilt to them. Like this one got a little tilt by accident, but just cut them out later if you need to. Maybe it's just a graphic, who knows? So, play around with the ideas here and then just keep going with them, all right? See what you can end up with. Maybe do something like that, who knows? Maybe it is layered a little bit, and so maybe this drops down right here all the way through just a little bit, and then maybe that comes back right here. So it's still selling that illusion of that line going all the way through, but it's not there no more all the way through. And it actually sends that same line back the other direction for the most part. We'll shrink those a little bit. I think those are a little bit too dark, perhaps, too big. They're pulling the design, the negative space there or positive space, whatever this ends up being. They're pulling the design all over the place. So you got to think about balance. Like this is this catches the eye a lot. These shapes, like they're bold, right? So they catch the eye a lot. Sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you don't want to do things like that. So could we do that instead, and then maybe add in like the idea of a little additional rail here, like another Picatinny rail, right? I'm not going to render it out fully, but could we put a rail here? Yes, we could. And that could maybe be useful for something. Who knows? So I don't I'm really not I really don't like this one right now for some reason. It's just seemed good at the time right now. So yeah, refine things, do a little bit of sketching on it, creating, designing, and then go back and say like, hey, this isn't working. It's not working for me. I think I'd much rather go with this at the top now. Maybe like a trapezoid. Okay. This one at the front, I'm gonna get rid of as well. This won't exist at some point. I'm gonna drop it down. So that became much higher because of that. So I don't know if I'd actually do that either. Let's just erase that one in there. And see if we can't do something here that works a little bit better. This one I'm gonna bring forward. I'm gonna make it like a complementary edge. So I'm just gonna move it real quick. I really wanted to run with that idea of this, right? I'm just gonna run it all the way back to here, like that. I need to fix the depth here because it's all over the place. Okay, that's a little bit nicer. So now I can grab this one and move it back real quick. And so we can start thinking about the width of that there, which is nice. Textures in this area. Complementary shape. Looking at this edge, there, all the way down. Would it step up instead? A little bit like that. And then would it roll back to there? So you can do all kinds of cool, fun stuff like that. There's no, I do like the idea of vertical ones though. So that's going to be the grip for the front there. It's very far forward for the front, but still, it could be useful maybe. Who knows? It'd be a lot of fun to do that. And so we could definitely change the ratio here of how thick these things are and just work it out. And I'm still not sure that would make as much sense right there though. I do like it, but I don't know. It's kind of a little too much maybe. No, there's something I'm missing here. I could definitely make some changes perhaps that would make it look a little bit more interesting. A little chamfer here. Maybe it's just a little piece that sticks out here for some reason. Add a little depth to it, right? Maybe there's a little piece that sticks out here at the front. Doing the chamfers, drawing the chamfers anyways, is probably going to be one of the most challenging things to do. Let's try making that half size. Let's see. Not quite. It could do a rounded triangle of sorts. Just throw that detail in there, maybe. Okay. Yeah, this just isn't working here, is it? So I guess this firearm will not get a forward texture. By the looks of everything I've tried so far, it's not working out. So aesthetically, it's just not. It doesn't seem like it works as well as it could with that front end. So, all right, there you go. You can erase this line real quick if we want. You can keep it if you want. Oops, erase it. Okay. All right, we still got work to do, right? Getting hung up there. So we need to think about textures and patterns throughout these areas. Like if you want to do additional, just kind of cool design patterns in these areas, you can, just like we were doing with the slide there. So we could run with some interesting kind of like shape breakups and things like that if we wanted to. If you want to go with more geometric type stuff as well, think about using a grid system. So a grid, very simple of an idea, right? So if you want to start thinking about a grid in this area, you want to put patterns in. You can do different shapes in those grid areas, perhaps, right? And so, if it's just like a waffle pattern, for example, you could do that perhaps, but you don't have to. You could do like circles or you can do irregular shapes too, where you take certain ones and run them around in here, right? So you can do like a big rectangle in here. You can bevel these things as well. So like this might bevel here at some point through this area. If I can do it right. And this might become like a pill. Would this help with the functionality of being able to hold onto the thing? Probably a little bit, but maybe not entirely. You know what I'm saying? These would probably stop short, and then there would be another piece on the front, perhaps, right? So you can think of this silhouette being broken up here as well with the grip, possibly. Okay. And you'd want to take your time to draw these nice and clean as much as you need to, anyways. Fill out that space as much as possible because you see these are pretty big gaps between one another. So you might not want to do that either. You might want to tighten everything up so that they become more like so, right? Let me erase these sides real quick. We'll just use a line tool for now. Just make it a little smaller. So you could do like all of them at the same time and then just erase where you need them to erase. Okay, so I spin to keep my lines straighter, but that's going to be up to you if you do that or not. Don't forget to mirror things too. Just because you're looking at it in this one direction doesn't mean it's going to look good in all directions, right? You see that worked out a little bit better. So almost like a waffle pattern, but then also um, another little element here for whatever reason. Maybe there's a recess in here. Trying to get that right, but probably should have drew it first. So maybe something like that's going on, some kind of logo or something. Who knows? All right. So press M to mirror, by the way. If it doesn't look right in both directions, you see how it looks a little funny this way, right? And so there's something wrong with it then. That's the main thing. And usually you should do this a lot sooner than we just did this. But it means something's wrong with the back strap here, the grip in general. It's got like a little slanted kind of a thing going on here. So um, and the main thing here I think that's really going on is that the back line is just too straight still, and it doesn't dip in far enough, maybe. Right? And so if you had a bunch of other lines depending off the curve here, that could possibly be a problem. But let's see if that looks a little bit better. It's still tilted back a little bit too far, I'd say. In a worst case scenario, you have like a big problem like this, right? And what you do is you grab all that and you might just transform it and skew it until it makes more appropriate sense there. And then move it back where you need it and try to get it working. Okay. So like we could do something like that and just tweak this overall. Wrong setup there basically. And we want to add a little bit of what is it, weaver tail, I think. That's what it's called. Something like that, anyways. Now we can go back and correct things as needed. Is that part of the frame or the part of the oh okay, it's just the elevation change. All right, that's good. So I need to fix that. But overall, we're starting to get some things going. Skewed that. Looks a lot better. Might want to fix that line too. And how we do that end section there is really, sometimes these things can be a little bit challenging. Short stroke it for now is missing the curve there. All right. So I do think we're a little better off now. Still something a little goofy about it, but we press M and we go back the other way. Much better of a layout overall. Can we keep working on it? Yes. We can add additional elements to do breakups of specific shapes. So if we want to do like a little, like a wedge coming out of this thing and have this raise up or something, like there's all kinds of fun stuff we can still do. We want to just do like a cutout here, or there's like a hole for some reason, we can. Possibility. I'm going to push those back in a little bit further. We can definitely render this better. So this is very much like a thumbnail, rough sketch. This is not um, anywhere near fully refined. So you will have to at some point continue working it if you're going to keep sketching with it. But these are still pretty good to go into 3D with and start working with them in 3D because you got the big basic primary shapes, secondary shapes, and then a lot of those tertiary details. Sometimes you want to figure them out in 3D because it's easier to see it when it comes to like chamfers and things like that, right? So, but getting the basic ideas worked out is the big thing. All right. So with all that out of the way now, just wanted to mark them lighter, but whatever. I think we'll be all right. So yeah, not too bad. We need texture at the front of this thing. If we're gonna have a little bit of texture, that's fine. I'm just gonna do like these little grooves, pull it up to about there, maybe. I don't know if these actually attach, but for now. We need the other additional functional pieces as well. So there's no safety selector. We're going to do a very basic idea of a safety selector. We could go with like the little switch, but there's one where it sits right in front of the trigger, basically, where it's just a paddle that goes, or a little button that goes back and forth through the trigger in the inside, and then that way it doesn't let you pull it no more. So we'll just do that one for now. It's pretty simple of an idea. We don't have a slide lock. Trying to think if I want the slide to be this piece or this piece. I don't know. It's like a big gap there. So having a big gap between the slide and the frame is not usually a good idea, but I think it works here. So I think we'll make this section part of the frame. As a result of that, we can have a slide release somewhere in here. And we could just mark where we want it at first with like a square, and then change the shapes around later on if we wanted. So we can do things like that as well. So that would be like the slide release. We got the safety. We need like a takedown lever, perhaps. Let's just use like a Glock takedown lever that would exist in this area. Some slides, and I don't know exactly where these things are placed at. I need to look that up, but the slides have what's like these little cutouts for the slide lock and the slide or the takedown as well. And they're somewhere in here. I think one goes in front of the other, and they're relatively in the same area, roughly speaking, or something like that. Sometimes they're external, sometimes they're on the bottom of the inside of the slide area. So things like that could add up. Do a little chamfer here at the top, why not? And do a little chamfer here at the top. There you go. That's all I do to indicate those, but this thing's still bugging me for some reason. I like it, but I don't like it at the same time. So it becomes too much like dead space without it, right? Could have a decocker and put a hammer in here so it's a double action. Or numbers like that, right? It would technically become a safety too, I think, right? Hmm. Something to think about. I don't know if I'll do that just yet. Also, this looks like it comes up too fast, so let's fix that. All right, anyway, so for the most part, it's kind of the main ideas in a nutshell. I'll change this a little bit so it goes more like this. And it might have a little one that's down here as well. So this would get like this like weird kind of inset molded kind of look. Because this is about matching the human hand here, so the thumb can rest there, right? And then this might get just pulled back a little bit more narrow, like. All right. Anyways, I think you got enough information here to run with your own designs now, right? You can just keep sketching on these things for the most part. We'll just finish this one out really rough and quickly, but oh yeah, see what's going on here? These aren't. That's not the front of the. It's not the front section. So they might be right here instead. Whoops, that was an error. This would be on another piece, so there'd be like a little seam here all the way through, right? So let's just finish out the waffle pattern real quick. Take your time rendering these things. You can round these ones out to match the border if you want to match them. You see how that goes. Oh, and this, like I was saying, you can round these things if you needed to. Normally, you might round the ones on the border, or if you're going to round all of them, you'd round the ones on the inside too, right? So instead of being perfect little squares, they get little bevels probably. I think you get the idea with that. So, and then you do the same thing on the back side here. Notice I'm using like a pretty heavy brush through this whole process. You definitely want to try doing details with something not so big, perhaps. You don't line these ones up here like that, maybe. See what I'm saying? And might end up with two, one on the back, one on the side, right? So you can do that number all day. And functionality wise, what are we missing? A magazine. You're still missing a magazine here at the bottom of this thing. So does it need to stick out and protrude a lot? No. Could do it like 5.7 or something where it's really narrow. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it's fun to maybe pull this down a little bit more. Do this number. And then cut into the surface. You can kind of do this towards the front, like something like this. Or you can do it just dead center, something like that perhaps. And then what you do is you make the magazine through this area like that. Maybe give it a little bit of a shape change with like a chamfer on it. You can dig into these things if you wanted to, where you're doing like cutouts and tapers and do all kinds of fun stuff like that as well, right? So there you go. We're gonna do some more sci-fi stuff in a future video, more alien-looking kind of stuff that requires. A lot of times you can still sketch it and draw it, no problem. But a lot of times it's fun to do it with silhouettes and tonal painting techniques. But it's definitely something you'll want to learn how to do as well, because you can go back and forth with these. If something just you're having a hard time coming up with something kind of unique with line art, uh, doing things with silhouettes first can sometimes be a lot more useful. And this is looking a little weak here. Let's try pulling that out like that. So you can change the profile of these things a lot as well if you really needed to. A lot of times these run into that area, right? So you're not always stopping there on that edge, because that whole area has kind of got a curve to it or a bevel of sorts, right? So you got to stop them a little bit further back. But all right, have we made a firearm for the most part? I'd say so. Could we put some texture in here still if we really wanted to? Yeah, sure. Why not? And we could finish that up as needed. I think you get the idea, though. A lot of stuff to think about, little things like this. So when you're doing this in 3D, I know a lot of you guys are going to try to go to 3D and start modeling your own version of a firearm. And you're thinking like, hey, this is going to be easy. I just use box cutter and hard ops and just start knocking things out. And Eventually, it will be. Like, you can do that at a certain point and just within an hour have, more or less a 3D model, of something even close to this level, right? But, it's gonna take a little while to get there, and when you haven't exercised that design muscle, it's gonna be even harder, right? So, you see, we still have things we can fix on this. It's not a perfect design by any means yet. It's not a very good one, just yet. So even though we're just sketching and drawing, it's very fast to do these things. Like, that angle might be just a little bit better if it was, brought forward and these were kind of at the same angle going down like a trapezoid perhaps, right? Little things like that we can do. There's all kinds of modifications you can make as well. So, like, if you wanted to have both of these going angled backwards, you could also do things like that, or maybe sell the illusion of that angle going backwards, in this area. Maybe it's not rounded. Maybe you can't see the barrel in here, and so you start knocking in some of those other kind of ideas that you see in some of the upper receivers there, and maybe you do the trapezoid anyways, but then you see what we're getting at here? Maybe this flattens out here at the back, so it's not quite fully a trapezoid. Maybe do something like that. So now we can switch here instead of doing the triangle the way it was exactly. Actually, it's the same thing. Never mind. It's a reverse version of it, basically. All right, but you can see we didn't tilt this back one in though, right? So maybe we want to tilt it in. Maybe we need that. See, erase that. Now we got the two triangles set up like that. A lot of fun little things you can do, guys. If you want to expose the internals a bit, you can probably put a chamber in here somehow. Put the barrel in there as well somewhere. Later on, you'll go back, you can ink this. So this will become your guide more or less, or your loose sketch. You can use a hard round brush that's pressure sensitive size, round liner brushes, hard round brushes, and a lot of brush smoothing. Or you can go into a vector program and start laying this out as vector art, which is also very effective. But you can go back and reline these things very deliberately. Okay, we're not going to do all the lining here, but that would be on another layer. And under that, let's just say our original sketch was line art now. Underneath that, you would have another layer. You can go back through and you can start shading everything. So if you know for a fact that this is going to be recessed in this area, turn off brush smoothing for this. We can add some shading in here, perhaps. This would be a rounded piece, a cylinder piece. This section would be more flat, right? And so we might just add a little bit of shading in there, take the gray and drop it down. You see how hard it is to select grays here because of the color selector being so small? Use a specific color selector and drop it by numbers sometimes is more useful. So you know exactly how far down you went. And so you go just a tiny bit lower and add something like that. And then maybe down here, this is shaded. It shades a little bit going to the back. But then as it comes forward, it goes up in brightness just a little bit, maybe right here. Okay. This might have a little bit of a ridge to it or catch the light a little bit like on a bevel. So you might do that there. This would be, of course, under your nice pristine line art, right? If you just want to go for it a little bit faster, you can turn the opacity down and just use black or whatever and just go for it. But a lot of times that won't work out too well. So you see this one already. Isn't too bad shading wise. So. But you'd go back through and pretty much shade it all is what I'm getting at here. And this the side would be a certain shade. The top would be a lighter shade, right? So top down lighting more or less. And as a result of that, it starts to come to life a little bit when you start rendering it, basically, doing the like actual render work. And this gets into closer to tonal painting as well. The only difference is when you're doing a tonal painting job and you're going straight from tonal painting to basically your illustration, more or less. You don't have to do all the line work necessarily like this. So I'm not going to shade all that right now, but we could say these ones come up and out in those areas, perhaps. and maybe these pieces here are actually pushed inside there instead. So there's still things we could correct. That's why I don't want to get focused on always like shading right off the bat. We need to think about just the overall design, the forms, all that fun stuff, and see what we can do with it, anyways. All right. So a lot of things to think about. Hopefully, you enjoyed the video and you got a kick out of it, seeing how you can just run with these like little design principles, I guess, or these little thoughts about controlling edges and flowing things together, lining them up. It can be a lot of fun. All right. So hope you enjoyed. Check you out in the next one. All right. Take care.